When you partner with Axon, you immediately gain access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. We carry all major brands and sizes of tires and wheels. We specialize in large diameter wheels for large equipment. We have one of the largest OEM replacement wheel inventories in North America. Known for extreme flotation setups, duals, and triples, we have wheels for all makes and models of tractors, sprayers, combines, and grain carts. If we don't have the wheel in stock, we'll custom build, sandblast, and paint in-house. There isn't a more vast inventory in North America dedicated to helping dealers move more iron. With facilities on the West Coast and in the heart of the Midwest, leverage our 230,000 square feet of indoor inventory to solve any problem a grower may have. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron. Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. I've got a guest on here that talking about the one thing in the ag community that I think is the most commonly discussed thing, and that's land values and cash rent. I got Chris Baumann here he's the founder of CommonGround, formerly known as Cash Rent. Chris, appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the time. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, man. So this is the one topic that I never hear anybody stop talking about, and that's what cash rents are, what land values are, and those kind of things. And as you take a look what's going on around in the world, there's a lot of things that are kind of flowing into that. But before we get into that, Chris, why don't you talk a little bit about your background, how you got here today, and then what CommonGround is.
Yeah, so just kind of been a lifelong entrepreneur, and a lot of real estate and construction background, mainly real estate, and born and raised here in Central Illinois, actually Morton, Illinois. It's the pumpkin capital of the world. A little fun fact for you, and just really had some early on successes with buying and selling some companies and real estate investing. And my passion really lies in the outdoors and hunting, fishing. And I was lucky enough about 11 years ago now, I bought my first farm. And I went into it just buying it as a hobby farm. Take the wife, the kids, go out and play, ride four-wheelers, and do some hunting and fishing. And, being a first-time landowner, I went out there after closing, and I met one of the neighbors, and first question he asked me, he says, "Who's going to farm your ground?" I said, "Well, I guess I never really thought of it like that. I just bought it to kind of play." And he's like, "Well, the guy currently farming it, he's a little outdated in his practices. I'd try somebody up the road." And so I tried the neighbor up the road, and I wound up putting a business card in his mailbox and said, "Give me a call." And we wound up talking, and he said, "Hey, I'd love to farm your ground." It was 160 acres, and 52 of it was tillable, so roughly, a third. And I said, "Okay, how's this work?" And he said, "Well, we're just going to do 50-50. We're going to split all the costs and split all the profits." And, I said, "Okay, let's give it a go." And we kind of went about that for a few years, and I started getting, into the seed bills, all the input bills I was getting, and then, I'm still trying to decipher what's all going on, and I'm getting calls to market my grain. And, I wound up calling my farmer, after running some math, and I said, "Look, this isn't really penciling out for me. I think I should be making a little bit more. On top of that, I really don't want to do 50-50 because it feels like I'm a partner in a farming business, and I really shouldn't be a partner in a farming business because that's not my background."
Right.
And so he said, "Okay, I get it. I totally understand." And he shot me a cash rental rate. And I said, "Okay, let me think about it and do my research, and I'll let you know what I want to do." And that's when I discovered, I was curious and like, okay, what is my ground really truly worth? And so I started digging in and doing research, and I wound up getting a GPS, and I found I had 52 acres instead of 50, so I picked up a couple of tillable that I didn't know I had from, over the years, field edges getting pushed back and et cetera. Did some soil samples, and then I started to pull all this fragmented data together, and which was time consuming. It was very time consuming. And, one of the most, I would say applicable resources was the, county averages published through the ag extensions. And so I kind of took all this data and I said, you know what, best case, find out what somebody's willing to pay. I'm going to sit down with a bunch of farmers. I went to high school with them. I'm friends with them. I'll sit down with them and show them everything I got and say, what would you pay for this farm? And one guy says, well, I'd pay this. And one guy says, I'd pay that. And one guy says, I'd pay this. And I'm like, whoa, wait, we got a huge range here. And what I realized is farming is a business, just like any other business. They have different sizes, different scales, different overhead structures. And every operator has a different risk appetite. Some people are willing to spread, their overhead out over more acres and take less of a margin. And, this really got me thinking of, okay, I'm a real estate investor, I don't let the tenant renting the house tell me what he's going to pay in rent. I set the rent and tell them what they're going to pay. So there was a paradox there that I didn't quite understand. And on top of that, there was no real true tool for price discovery in the agricultural rental space. There was the acre value or the,
Sure.
whatever that was where you could go and look at land values based off of sales comps. But there was a shrouded underbelly of the, ag industry of a 60, 70, $80 billion a year industry with no transparency. And that's where all this was born from. It was out of my frustration and saying, hey, if I can build a tool that provides quick, easy price discovery for landowners and give them the opportunity to put this on an open, transparent marketplace and bring a little bit of competitiveness to it, we might have something here that will help landowners achieve price equilibrium and maximum ROI.
Yeah.
And it's going to allow farmers to grow their operations, because talking with all my buddies and all my friends, it was like, hey, how do you grow your farming operation? Well, it's really hard because land's very expensive right now,
Right.
very capital intensive. So the next best option is to lease ground or rent ground. And that is not an easy thing to do. You gotta have your ear to the rail and know what's going on. And that's the great thing about this platform is not only is it helping landowners find good quality tenant farmers, it's also giving farmers opportunities to have access and a kick at growing their operation that they never otherwise would have heard of. So that's kind of the crux of how all this got started, and I'll stop there and let you ask any questions.
Yeah. So I think you hit on a couple things there. One is the cash rent war that we see every year when you start talking to farmers. Typically it doesn't change hands very often for the most part, and every once in a while someone comes into an area and starts throwing money around and picks up some stuff that someone traditionally had been renting for a while. But for the most part, whoever rents that, they always have first right of refusal every year or however long the contract is, and they kind of go back and forth. As you've looked at this, as you built your system here, and you've kind of put everything together into CommonGround, what are some of the norms that you see that are maybe not as normal anymore after you kind of look at this process?
Well, I would say the traditional norm is your lease is up and you just say, hey, do you want to sign for another year? And there might be a little bit of banter back and forth of, okay, what should the new price be? And I think as the trend I'm seeing is landowners are getting more pragmatic about this, realizing that I have an asset here that is worth a great amount of value, and I don't necessarily need to, squeeze the farmer to, the top buck and be the high guy.
Right.
But it's an expensive asset I'm holding here, and I want to maximize it as much as possible. So, we have a range of customers. People come to our site and they print off cash rent statement. We get cash rent statements done thousands of times a month. And some of those people print that off and they take it to their farmer and say, hey, here's a third-party data source that says, this is what it should be. Here's the range. And it's very conservative, and that's fine if they want to do that. But then maybe they have that conversation with the farmer. But I think what we're seeing is the landowners are saying, hey, this is where the shift is, and this is what I tell the landowner all the time. They're like, well, we're happy with the farmer. The farmer might be paying $250, and they should be getting $400. Okay, well, have the conversation with your farmer that you're going to put it on an open, transparent marketplace. Go to the site, register, and bid. And as long as you're in the ballpark, I'm going to continue to use you. But we're going to find out what this asset is truly worth. Because 99% of the time, when we provide that range in the cash rent estimate, it's exceeded the high range of that estimate every single time. And we still leave it up to the landowner to say high bid doesn't win. It's your asset, you're in control, you're in the driver's seat. So you go through the farmer profiles, you select the tenant farmer that you see fit. And I would say more often than not, high bid does not win. And it's just all the reasons are across the board. You know, it might be some little old lady wants to give a 32-year-old kid a shot at growing his operation that's currently farming 700 acres and trying to grow into a 2,000 or 3,000 acre grower.
Right.
You know, so in some cases, it's, hey, the guy that was a high bid, he's 45 miles away from my farm. He's going to come into town, plant, he's going to leave, he's going to come back in and harvest. I want a local guy that's going to drive by every day and clean the, you know, road ditches and mow and treat it like it's their own. So I think there's, you know, obviously going to be a large transference of land to non-farming landowners, and they're going to need a resource like this to know how to manage it.
Right. So when you look at, so that's two-part question here. When you look at the number of the age of the farmer and as many farmers that are going into some level of retirement, whether it's they're just scaling back their operation or they're, you know, absolutely getting out of everything altogether and you know, moving to town. Seems like a lot more guys are not interested in selling their land as much as they are cash renting their land as a revenue source, obviously, and doing those things. But I guess when you look at that, are your numbers coming up? Are you seeing more people interested, retirees kind of coming in and wanting to use your...
I wouldn't say retirees, because if, let's just say you've been farming for 40 years.
Right.
And you're saying, okay, it's time to hang it up, but I'm not selling the ground. I'm going to cash flow this and have it be passive income. If you've been doing it 35, 40 years, you've got a pretty good idea and a pretty close network of who you're going to let rent that ground.
Right.
You know, that is more the norm nowadays. So I wouldn't say it's just those guys putting it up. What I will say is there's a lot of farmers that use our software because they're purchasing land outside of their footprint that they farm.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
See what I'm saying? So we've got farmers in Illinois that find a good deal in Indiana, and they buy the farm ground in Indiana, and they'll put it on the site, and they'll find a good quality tenant farmer through our software. So that is more of, you know, the farmer using this on the investment side of things than just, oh, I'm retiring. But we have had instances where farmers are retiring and they want to give everybody in the community a fair shake.
Right.
So it's not like they walk into the coffee shop after retirement and it's like, hey, you didn't even give me a crack at renting your ground. You just gave it to Bob up the road. And so you do get a little bit of that mindset of, hey, this takes the burden off of you.
Yeah.
And you can walk into the coffee shop and say, I gave every single one of you an opportunity to rent this ground.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you look at the other thing, the cash rent side of this, I was when I was going through your website, I saw it too, hunting leases.
Yeah.
That seems to be a big deal. When you, it is a big deal because everything I want to hunt's leased up. But if you take a look at that scenario, how much has that changed your program over the years? Well,
considerably, because we started out, you know, with this, you know, one-dimensional view of, you know, CommonGround was not CommonGround. It was cashrent.com.
Right.
And what we found was land brokers started using our software, and it was walking a piece of ground with a buyer and saying, oh, this farm's for sale for $500,000. The current cash rent is $200,000. The cash rent estimate shows it should be getting $375,000. Let's buy it at $500,000, put it on the site, get the rent up to $375,000, and inherently raise the value of the asset that you just paid $500,000 for. Now it's worth more because the cap rate on the rental side is higher. So brokers, land brokers, and land professionals started using this as a tool to help buyers and really expand their tool set for their clients. And then shortly after, it was like, well, I get asked for hunting leases all the time. And we've got these absentee landowners that are leasing ag ground, but they've got, you know, 85 or 100 acres of tillable, and there's 65 timber on there that's got great deer and turkey hunting. Would you like to lease that out and increase your ROI even more. And talking with all these land brokers, it was, well, we get asked about hunting leases all the time, but there's really no good way to have that conversation, because it's like, yeah, I might know a guy that'd want to lease that, but like, how am I gonna get paid? Like, why am I taking the time to do this? And so we just got asked, like, hey, if you're doing agricultural leases through this, marketplace, why can't you do hunting leases? So it was a very easy fit for us. And then along came, well, if you can do ag lease auctions and you can do hunting lease auctions, can we, build for sale auctions within the platform as well? So we built and expanded our tool set, and that's when we rebranded to CommonGround, because we weren't just cash rent anymore. And we saw the same exact thing happen with hunting leases that we have with farm ground leases, because, first area we started doing hunting leases was in Indiana. We met with a group of brokers and it said, what is a good hunting lease for deer and turkey go for in the state of Indiana? $25, $30 an acre. That's what everybody said. And these are the land professionals. Well, we started leasing hunting leases in Indiana, and they were going for $55, $65, $70 an acre, because it was opened up to a much wider audience that was willing to pay for said lease. So we were getting calls from Pennsylvania, from Mississippi, and it just opened up that pool, instead of putting an ad out in the paper or just throwing it out on Facebook locally. So we saw the same thing happen. And the big results for the brokers is they're getting 50, 60, 70 phone calls of people that are interested in leasing. And it's like, well, are you interested in leasing? If you don't get this one, are you looking to purchase? It's like, yeah, well, I eventually want to purchase if you found me something like this. So they're getting really, really warm leads coming in for buyers as well. Mm-hmm. And, it's been great for their business to get into the hunting lease.
Yep. Okay, so the next question I have for you would be, so cash rent, you're figuring that out. How do you go about figuring out what cash rent is? How do you establish that value?
You're saying through the cash rent estimate?
Yeah.
So we basically take a list of localized factors. So we'll take, it's basically a recipe, if you will, which takes a lot of different data points into consideration. And, I don't want to specifically discuss them all, but,
sure. No,
that's kind of the secret sauce.
Secret sauce there, yeah.
We basically built an algorithm to say this specific field with this, in Illinois, it's PI, Productivity Index, it's CSR2 in Indiana or Iowa. So we take the soil ratings in this location for this county with, these yields on historical data, and then we utilize like input pricing and commodity prices to basically generate out a range. And we did it with a range because there's always certain specific factors to each individual farm that you might not know about, that maybe the landowner doesn't even know about. You could have an 80 flat black that might be one range. You could have that 80 with flat black might have tiling that increases yields, and we don't know if it's tiled or not. So we give that range to say, on the low end, you should be getting this. On the mid range, you should be getting this. On the high range, you should be getting this. And as I told you earlier, 9 times out of 10, it's probably 99% out of 100, it exceeds the high range. We're very conservative, because what we found is when you open up into a competitive marketplace, things get competitive quickly, and it just works. Our average increase for a landowner is 39.5%. We've been doing this 3 years.
Yeah, I saw your testimonials there that are going across on the cash rent estimate page, and what they're showing them is, here's one guy that was, he got $620 an acre, and he's previously getting $360 an acre.
Well, and that's kind of a flyer. Right? That was not the norm. $620 on that ground. There were 2 guys just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So there were 2 guys that really wanted that. Yeah. To get it up to 620, that is a flyer.
Right.
That 620, you're not gonna make any money. So,
exactly.
But typically, our auctions run competitive, but there's always 4, 5, 6 people kind of in that same range. We just did some in Iowa, and there were 3, 4 bidders all between 500 and 510. And it's decent ground, and we did a couple here in Illinois that was the same thing. We hit, 490 to 510 was the bulk of the range. And, we averaged 12 bidders per property, so 12 unique farmers are bidding is our average. Some have 6, some have 18, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But it combines into roughly, on average, about 70 bids. But it's always a soft close auction. So the guy that, is the eBay expert that wants to put in a 500 bid with 1 second left, it resets it and adds 15 minutes to the clock.
Right.
And, inevitably you see just a linear, increase in the bidding. And then with the last half hour, it hockey sticks and everybody says, this is my highest and best. I'm tapping out. And that's when that's the genius of this is that's what it's worth. And I've got 4 very qualified or 5 very qualified farmers willing to pay that. So you pick who you want. You've got a list of 12 to go from.
Right.
So, and we had a guy in Indiana, he inherited some ground. It was him and his sisters. And he was getting $200 in rent. And he said, hey, I saw one of your podcasts that you did. I love what you're doing. We just inherited this ground and we want to put it on the site. Great. He got $385 and he took a bid of $275. He left $110 on the table. And I was like, that's your choice? And he's like, yeah, it's the guy currently farming it. I'm going to come up $75. I'm happy. The $100, split it 3 ways between my sisters and pay tax. It's not that much. I wanted to keep the same guy on there, but at least I got him up $75. I'm like, cool, as long as you're happy.
Yeah. And that's the unique thing about some of the relationships that are built in the ag community. That's a good example of that. Not everybody is out to get the highest dollar. They want the best person or the person that they want to give a shot to help grow.
Literally 9 out of 10 times, high bid does not win.
Yeah. It was pretty unique.
Yeah.
Pretty unique. Anywhere else, that would be completely opposite. But
correct.
In the ag community, it's.
But that's why we set it up that way.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm sitting in a high rise in Chicago. I live in the middle of cornfields and bean fields, and a lot of my friends farm, and you don't want to disrupt those relationships.
No. Well, if you don't
but
yep.
it is a business. You need that. The farmer needs to make money, but the landowner needs to make money. And
right.
I had this conversation with a guy yesterday who owns 1,800 acres in Iowa, and his taxes. Everybody across the board in Iowa, their taxes went up roughly 30%.
Yeah.
Because if land values are increasing.
Yeah.
And then they're going to get reassessed. Oh, my taxes just went up 30%. Well, why is my rental rate not increasing 30% to offset my costs as a landowner to carry this ground?
Right.
So, and you can assume that I always get, oh well, you're driving up rental rates. And it's like, I don't set the rental rates, man.
Right.
I just provide the software in a marketplace.
Yep.
I just put it out there, and I talk to a lot of growers a lot of times, and we've got a lot that here locally that believe in what we're doing, and we meet with them on a regular basis. And I explained to one guy that he said I'm driving up rental rates. I said, well, what do you think that does for the value of your ground? He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, if you've got 2 farms right next to each other, you own one and an investor buys it, and it was previously getting that 200, just that example we talked about. Of when you raise the rental rate, you increase the value of that farm on a cap rate basis. When that investor goes to sell it, he bought it at 500, doubled the rent, now he's selling it at 800 or 900. That's a comp for your farm next door.
Right.
So it's increasing your balance sheet, and when you suppress rental rates, you're suppressing an entire asset class.
Yep. No, that's true. And it's the same. I mean, what you're describing there is very similar to what we do on the used equipment side of the business when we're sitting there looking at equipment values and going through that whole process of what's it worth, Because I look at it, used equipment to me is no different than your land. It's a commodity, right?
Absolutely.
It's something that someone is willing to pay for, and whatever they're willing to pay for that day, that's what the price of it is.
Worth.
And you have an auction, same scenario. You have an auction, you throw it out there, you have 100 different people bid on this piece of equipment, and it's like you said, it starts out very linear, kind of climbing up, and then it crescendos at the end, and somebody says, all right, I'm out. This is what I'm willing to pay for it, and then you start to establish what that that's worth. And the same thing, even if you go back onto like the rental side of equipment thing, it's the same difference, right? You start looking at what's my cost to hold, what's fuel costs, what are maintenance costs, all those things come into play. It's very similar, and it's not any different other than the fact that you're dealing with a non-depreciating asset, and I'm working with something completely different. So, but it's the same scenario when you look at it from that perspective. There's no real difference there, and if you go back 20, 30 years ago when everybody had a Fast Line magazine or an old Tractor House catalog or the classified ads or whatever it was, you had a very defined amount of people that were going to see what you had to offer.
Absolutely.
And you didn't have that blanket where now you're getting you can say, hey, these things are doing these things, but at the end of the day, the reason more people these prices are coming up is because more people are seeing it, and you have a more competitive space.
If you had a used combine and you personally wanted to sell it, and you went to 3 farmers and said, I'm selling this combine, what would you pay me for it? And they're all local, versus putting it out on the internet and advertising it across the entire Midwest, you're going to get completely different results.
Yeah.
And that's the trend that I'm really trying to shift, is because if you go back and like you said, 20 years ago with your Tractor House catalog and, going through it like that, well, what was the radius that a farmer would farm 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
Wasn't very far.
Wasn't very far. It was hyper-localized. It was 10 miles, 15 miles. Mm-hmm. Well, now we see farmers traveling 60 miles, 70 miles, because they're growing their operations and they're farming here, and then they're growing it in a swath, and they're farming, from point A to point B to point C. Right. So when you open up and kind of, blow the whole hyper-localization out of the water, you're going to get a higher bidding pool, and that's going to inherently bring more competition and higher prices.
Yeah. It's definitely a different era than we've been into, and you start looking at the amount of technology, and you talked about data and those kind of things, and I'm sure the amount of data that you have available on these pieces that your auction off is grows every time you go back and do it, just because of what's being produced.
Yeah, and to that, every time something is leased, it feeds back into our algorithm for the estimate. Mm-hmm. Because we know, okay, this piece of ground with this productivity index in this county just leased and got these top 4 bids of this, that can backfeed into the equation and help our data constantly be refined to be able to give a real-time estimate that is as accurate as possible. And I joke with everybody all the time. I personally believe that our government is the most efficient, well-oiled machine in the history of mankind. But the USDA data is it's a bit stale, and it's self-reported. So let's mail all the farmers a survey and just write down on a card what you pay an average cash rental rate, and then mail it back to us, and then we'll compile it, and it'll get out a year later, and it's just garbage data, and it shouldn't even be out there for public consumption. So, our goal is to be the data source for what is the real-time rental rates, and we're getting more dynamic every single day and working towards, if you come on and do a cash rent estimate today, you could come on and do that same farm a week later, or 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, and it's different.
Yeah.
So
that's also the beauty of technology too, and the information flow is that you get the latest, greatest information in front of you. That way, you're making good decisions on what's out there.
And the ag community has just absolutely loved. I love transparency. I want to know transparency in my seed pricing. I want to know transparency in equipment pricing. I want to know transparency in chemical pricing. But when it comes to rental rates, they don't want any transparency. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, you can't have it both ways here. And when these farmers are embracing technologies, you're on the equipment side of things. You know way more than me about how technology has increased yields. You've got GMO seeds, you've got equipment that is, harvesting 20, 30% more and not dropping it on the ground. So these farmers are embracing technology in the cab and reaping the benefits. Yeah, it costs more. It's not a one-to-one increase, but they're wanting price transparency in their input pricing. But if these farmers utilize this properly, they can really, really use this to grow their operations.
Yep, for sure. All right. From a geographical perspective, where does most of your areas come from, and do you have inquiries to lease land all over the country, or is it pretty centralized, or kind of where you?
I would say 90% of what we do is in the Midwest. I mean, we lease ground in Minnesota, South Dakota, Iowa. Illinois is our big one just because we're from here and in the central part of the state. Indiana, Missouri, done a few in Arkansas, but it's all, for the most part, it's all row crop, corn and soybeans. But we're expanding. We've leased ground in New York. We've leased ground in California. We're rolling out our cash rent tool in about 14 or 15 other states over the next few months. So like Pennsylvania, Maryland, some of these non-traditional, like when you're from the Midwest, you're like, oh, they don't grow anything in Maryland. Yeah, they do actually.
Yeah, grow quite a bit.
So we started in the Midwest. We can facilitate leases. The beauty of technology is we can facilitate leases anywhere in the United States. So it doesn't matter. We've done hunting leases in Texas. So we're very agile in that respect. But we started in the Midwest. That's where we're the strongest.
Right on. All right, last question here, and we'll get it wrapped up. As you take a look at going through 23 into 24, as you take a look at kind of what you're seeing right now as far as how the economy is shaping up and commodity prices and all those kind of things, what are your thoughts about how cash rent's going to play out in 24? Do you see increases, decreases? Kind of what are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, like I said earlier, my crystal ball is slightly fuzzy, but I think we're going to remain in an inflationary environment through at least the mid part of 24. That's just my best guess off of what I'm seeing. I think you're going to see rental rates continue to increase just because there's such a disparity in what's actually being paid versus what these farmers are actually willing to pay. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some factors that are going into that these farmers are realizing, hey, I've got to grow my operation. Like maybe margins are getting squeezed. That means I got to farm more ground. It's just the law of large numbers at that point for them. I also think, we didn't touch on this, but I worked with Hudson Insurance Group. They now offer a private product that they call the CLIP. It is a cash lease insurance protection policy. It's exclusive through Hudson. But basically, I had farmers, and you can appreciate this because they're signing leases right now for 2024. Mm-hmm. And when you're signing a lease at $510 an acre today, not knowing what the price of corn or beans is going to be in the fall of 24,
yeah,
that's a pretty big matzo ball hanging out there. And I saw the opportunity to say, okay, in these high rental environments, how can we create a product to protect that farmer and give them an option to insure a portion of their rent? So it's a very unique product where if utilized properly, you can get aggressive and rent ground and go after it for the high buck. But then on the backside, you can start to buy insurance to say, hey, I want $75 of this rent covered. I'm willing to pay X number of dollars per acre. But if the price of corn goes to $4.80, you're covering that $75. My insurance kicks in. So it really allows the farmer to get creative. And through an insurance product, they really don't have to market that grain anymore. They're just buying a rental protection policy to say,
yeah,
and they could cover up to the full. If they're renting for $500, they could buy $500 worth of coverage,
right?
And they can layer it in. One day they could buy $50 worth of coverage. The next day they could buy $75. 2 weeks they could see the price of corn go up and they could buy another $50, because they want to buy that insurance when the commodity's up, and then basically set the floor to where if it drops, the insurance will kick in and pay the indemnity. So I think coupled with that product, once this product gets out there and people start realizing, it just launched in August, end of August of this year, so it's relatively unheard of. But I think you're going to find aggressive, progressive, growers that are savvy. I think you're going to see them utilize this clip product through Hudson to really go after it and get aggressive, and I think it's going to push rental rates a little higher, honestly.
Right on. Okay. Well, I would have never thought of something like that, but that's a pretty ingenious way to look at your rental thing, I guess. No different than buying hedges and puts and calls and all that kind of stuff. When it takes
that out of it,
Yeah.
and the pricing is there or less to where you get a hold of your Hudson agent and they can sit down and run the calculator with you and say, hey, you've got this much exposure. That's what your exposure is. This is what federal doesn't cover. Like, this is the red zone. Let's layer in this clip policy to really protect what's flapping out in the wind.
Yeah.
So, and what we see is banks are going to start to really push it, because these banks are nervous as cats in a high rental rate environment.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like, hey, you want an operating line and you're paying $510 in rent? No different than homeowners insurance when you got a mortgage. Like, hey, we'll loan you the money, but if that house burns down, it better be insured. So we'll give you an operating line on this ground for $510 rent, but you need to pick up a certain percentage of insurance on this to make sure if things go south, the insurance kicks in and pays a portion of your rent, and we stay whole and you stay whole. So I think you're going to see the banks really start to push this as a condition of, this is a part of your loan for an operating line or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, Chris, great conversation, man. This is a real unique concept you have here, and I think that this is going to change the way that, as we move forward in this, people look at cash rents and how that works. So if folks want to reach out to you and get more information about CommonGround, what's the best way to do that?
Just shoot me an email. You can shoot me an email at chris@cashrent.com or chris@commonground.io. Reach out anytime, call the number on the site. It comes right to my cell phone. So I'm a hands-on white glove type service guy. So you're not going to get a secretary. You're not going to get a switchboard. You're going to get my cell phone and talk to me anytime. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, appreciate it. So just go to CommonGround, just like it's spelled, just like it sounds, .io, and you can get all the information there. Got a nice website showing all the different leases that are up available and all the contact information there as well. So, Chris, appreciate you being on the podcast, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Casey, thank you.
Right on. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast and go over to the YouTube channel, which is the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. Go to Moving Iron LLC for everything Moving Iron related, and have some big announcements coming out here in the next couple of months about that. So, with that, I'm Casey Seymour with Chris Baumann. It's going to be smart, folks. Out.
Moving iron in the 21st century.